When I went to school in my country, I learned a lot of historical inaccuracies because the Communist Party has changed history in order to promote the communist ideology. And of course, after the communist regime fell, all those inaccuracies were corrected, but I went to school during the transition period, so I remember a lot of the things that I learned which were plainly wrong. For example, the fact that the nobility was trying to prevent the peasantry from learning, and they were actively persecuting peasants who owned books. In reality, books within the medieval time period were incredibly expensive. Someone actually made a calculation and found out one book to be worth the same price a Ferrari is worth today, because making books was incredibly expensive. A page alone, a vellum, from what I understand, required several sheep to make. And then you also have to think about the ink. And you also have to think about the fact that only a couple of people knew how to write at the time. So it would have been very difficult to have the schooling system we have today with the technology that was available. So that is why a lot of peasants didn't know how to write. It's because they wouldn't have access to books because they were very expensive. But fun fact, some of them might actually know how to read. They wouldn't know how to read in Latin, which was the requirement to be considered literate. But they would probably know how to read the prices at the market. They would probably know how to read the signs of various shops. So, yeah, I mean, it's not really the idea that the peasantry was being kept under control by the nobility and prevented from reading and writing. Now, as I said at the beginning, I wanted to make a video debunking that. But unfortunately, that has to wait because there's something more interesting to debunk. There's a lot of sociology professors that are publishing blatant intellectual dishonesty in their papers. And it seems that it's going viral on Twitter. And a lot of people are now believing, unironically, that the life of a peasant is better than the life of a person living today, because today we are under capitalism, you see, and capitalismus is exploiting us. So unironically, we have worse lives than the peasantry of old. So let's read one of these interesting papers. How could have things been better in medieval times? Well, before capitalismus, most people did not work very long hours at all. Considering a typical working day in the medieval period is stretched from dawn to dusk, which is 16 hours in the summer and 8 in the winter. But as Bishop Pillington has noted, work was intermittent, called to a halt for breakfast, lunch, the customary afternoon nap, and dinner. Depending on time and place, there were also mid-morning and mid-afternoon refreshment breaks. These rest periods were the traditional rights of laborers, which they enjoyed even during peak harvest times. I mean, there is a consensus, I've been told, among sociology professors that the internet shouldn't be free and censorship is required to maintain our democracy. And I can see why. I can see why statements like this require censorship in order to exist, because otherwise people would start laughing and mocking them. Now, you don't really need to learn much about medieval history to know why this is false. There are certain places in the world right now, like for example, villages in the Romanian mountains that still have that medieval lifestyle. They do not have electricity, they do not have plumbing, they're self-sufficient to a degree. And I went there. I had a couple of relatives and I went there, and you can see how they live their life. For example, yes, even if, let's say it's a Sunday, when it's a day off and they're supposed to go to church, you still have to wake up early in the morning and feed the animals. You still have to clean your house using the tools available at the time, because you don't have a Roomba, you don't have a vacuum cleaner. You still have to go and clean the stables. You still need to go down to the village well and carry water to your house. Doing the laundry is difficult because they don't have a washing machine, so they have to do it by hand. They still have to go to their garden and pick the strawberry. They still have to take the cow to graze I know this is mind blowing for the people at the academia, but even though it's a free day, the cow doesn't understand that and still would like to go out and eat food. And you can't just allow the cow to run around because then you lose it. And in these medieval times, a cow is the difference between life and death. Like, without the cow's milk, it's very difficult for the family to survive the winter. But okay, and this is like only in a day where you have time off. Like, all of these things you do for yourself. All right, so like the people that I went to didn't have a noble that they need to work for, and they still have some of the technological advancements we have today. Even though they're in the mountains and they don't have electricity, they still have cars. And if there's an emergency, they can take the car all the way down to the city and they can do some shopping from there. And the tools that they use are far better than the tools that the people in medieval time would have used. So we're only talking about a day that is quote unquote off, like a Sunday. Because like during the actual working season, yeah, they have to go on the field and they do back-breaking labor. They don't have a lawnmower in order to cut the shrubbery. They use the scythe. Do you know how difficult that is? Because I used one when I was a kid. So a complete mental disconnect from the real world, a complete lack of intellectual honesty from the academia, something that can easily be debunked just by looking at how people live today with all the technological advancements that we have today, and how they live in the mountains, secluded from the corporate lifestyle and capitalism. It's like, no, they have their family and they have their land. Like, that's how they live. And you can actually examine them. You can look at how the Amish live in more secluded places. And you can say, okay, well, clearly, it's not an easy life. Don't get me wrong, it can be a fulfilling life, but I'm not saying it's an easy life. And because of that, you have people that are saying medieval peasants worked only about 150 days out of the year. The church believed it was important to keep them happy with frequent mandatory holidays. You have less free time than a medieval peasant. This is absolute nonsense that 70,000 people like, and I'm not blaming this lady because like she is educated. She's speaking with the words of the academia. And this is a trend on the Twitter. Medieval peasants had no student loan debt, no medical bankruptcies, never had to worry about high gas prices. What went wrong? Capitalism. I mean, yeah, I guess in a place where you have no doctors and you can die of the plague or your wife can die at childbirth, yeah, there's no medical bankruptcies, I agree. Because there's no medical bills to pay. You don't have any universities, any schools, so yeah, you don't have student loan. And you don't have to worry about high gas price. It's very difficult at this point to even know if this guy is trolling. I genuinely don't know. But like, if you go into his comment sections, there are people who aren't trolling. Like, there are people who are defending his statement. It's beyond astonishing. And not only that, like the concept that the life of a medieval peasant is better than what we have today, I don't even know where to begin. I mean, we live better. Like the average person today, the average person lives far better than any medieval king. I mean, just think about the fact that on your average dinner table, you have things that kings didn't even know exist. There are European kings that had no clue bananas exist, that didn't know that kiwis exist. They didn't even have pizza. Like, the debate between the pineapple and the pizza wouldn't even exist because they didn't know that both of them exist. And as you can see, even if the guy is trolling, look how many people that are obviously not. The peasants were worse off materially, but you could make the argument that they were more happy. I mean, I don't know how you can make this argument because you can't go back in time and poll their happiness level. Given the fact that in some places, like Russia, they had an uprising against the nobility and there were peasants' revolts, I would assume that they weren't always happy. I would assume that sometimes they were unhappy. And some people will say, yes, but like in Russia, they were manipulated. You can't manipulate happy people. I don't know any happy person that can be manipulated into changing the entire system of a nation. They had a home that was always there, a united family that loved them. I don't know about the marital disputes within the medieval time period, but okay. A stable source of income. This is the dumbest take. A stable source of income. Like, dude, if you have a famine, like the locusts are coming, they didn't have pesticides back then. If there's a drought, if there's a flood, what stable source of income? Even the king didn't have a stable source of income. Do you know that a king had to move around constantly? Because, like, he wouldn't stay at his capital or at his castle nonstop. He would move around the country because as he stayed in one place, the resources from that place diminished. Like the number of cows were diminishing, the number of sheep, and right? Because he would eat, and they didn't have refrigerators back then. And the strong faith to give them a clear sense of right and wrong. Yes, I know, the Inquisition was muy tsuyoi. But I love how he ignores all the negative aspects, like the Huns, the Goths, the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, the Tatars, and other wars. And I actually argued with him, and he's like, no, you don't understand. You don't understand because, like, the peasants wouldn't go to war. And I'm like, really? Really? So, like, when the Huns are coming, and they're pillaging, and they're raping, because it's in the name, rape and pillage, you think the peasants would have just stood there? It's like, no, hold on. Unarmed combatant, okay? Like, if you do something against me, you're going to appear on CNN, Mr. Han. Whatever. And then you have people saying that a farmer worked 4 hours a day. I guess, you know, like, this might be true in some situations, like during winter. Yes, like when the farmer had absolutely no heating, no insulation in his house, and was actually sleeping with his farm animals inside. I'm not kidding, you can look it up, like they would sleep with their farm animals. Because the like the cow would breathe carbon dioxide, which would make the room a lot warmer. That's how they warmed themselves up, the more of the poor folk. And yeah, like in that situation, probably they worked only when there was daylight, because they didn't, like, candles were very expensive. But even then, it's like, okay, well, it's only during the winter when people are freezing. And you best pray that you had a bountiful harvest, because otherwise it's not so good. And you best pray no one gets sick, because you don't have any medical equipment. So this whole idea that, like, now we need to consider that in a medieval society things were better. Okay, like it just blows my mind. And even, like, from a ideological perspective, like you're saying that capitalism, which is a word that Karl Marx coined, right? It's a communist concept, which basically means that people are allowed to be free. That is what capitalism means. Like, people are allowed to be free. Like, do whatever you want, trade with whomever you want, just do whatever. That is capitalism. But they are now saying that a monarchy, a system where you are born to be privileged, like you're literally better than other people just because you're born in the correct family, and someone else that might be the smartest man in the world is born into a poor family, like, that system is better than capitalism. I don't know why communism has gone full circle, because, like, in the early stages, it was a movement against the aristocracy. I mean, if you look at Russia, you will see that most beef that the revolutionaries had was with the aristocracy and the clergy. And now you have, like, other people from the sociology department who are openly Marxist. Like, I'm not using communism as a derogatory term. I'm using it as a descriptive term, because that's how they describe themselves. They describe themselves as Marxist. And they are saying that, no, you know, like, monarchy was better. You know, here's something else that's interesting. So, in my country, if I'm not mistaken, the peasants had to pay around 15% tax to the nobility and 10% tax to the church. And that's like 25. And every now and then there were the Ottoman Empire that would place like another 5% tax. And every single time that happened, the peasantry would rebel. Now, that is 30% tax, okay? Now, let's look at today. You got the VAT tax, you got the income tax, you got the health tax, you got the road tax, and when you add all those taxes up, the direct and indirect ones, you end up to something like 50% taxes. I don't think you want the peasantry of old to come today. I really don't think that. I don't think... I mean, look at the United States. Didn't they have a revolution because of taxation? I don't think, like, these socialists would really want the mindset from the noble peasant to shine light today. Last time that happened, I think it was called Tax Enough Already, and I understand it's a horrible movement. The Tea Party, right? Taxed enough already. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you in the comment section. Take care.